much. Hello, everyone. To start with, I want to thank, questions. I want to thank the coordinators of the conference for a great show, and I want to thank the panelists for their time and all of you for welcoming us here. Today we're going to be talking about big data and precision medicine, and just to little clarification, precision medicine, there's a subtle difference between that and personalized medicine, but for the sake of the conversation today, we'll be using them interchangeably. So now, there's no shortage of data in healthcare, and it's growing at about 40% annually, according to IDC. Now, the challenge with data in health is that you have to create context around it and make it relevant to physicians and to patients to be able to use it. And the thing with data also in healthcare is that it's not just about volume. That's one vector, right? There are other vectors such as regulations. Who gets access to that data? What can you do with it? Another vector is complexity, right? You have tons of heterogeneous data coming to you from different sources, different formats, different instruments. How do you integrate all that data? How do you use it to then drive decision-making downstream? So before going too far down that path, I think we need to take a step back and level set as to what the term big data really means in healthcare, because that term is used a lot, and I'm sure that it means something different to everybody here. So we'll start by doing a little exercise, and in that exercise, I'm going to make some assumptions, and then I'm going to need your participation for a little part of it. It'll be fun. So to begin with some assumptions, I'll assume that most people here in this room have taken basic biology, chemistry, mathematics. And a second assumption is that everybody in this room is a human being. So I think it's a fair statement. So if we start with that, then the only part that I'm going to need your participation for will be when I do this, then I want everybody here to count to the number 1. As simple as that. So let's try it once. Ready? A little bit louder than that. Ready? 1. Okay, great. So now, consider that every human being in this room has over 40 trillion cells in their body, and that those cells have 6 billion DNA bases that account for over 20,000 genes and tons of regulatory factors. And consider that those 40 trillion cells also have, they undergo thousands, if not millions, of chemical reactions every single second. So let's pause on that for just 1 second and think about that. 1. In that 1 second, every single person here underwent about 40 quintillion chemical reactions, and that just 1 second just by sitting there. Now that's big data. And if you try to track that and consider the fact that those cells don't live in isolation, they work in collaboration with each other, they create tissues and organs like your heart, which will beat about 3 billion times in your lifetime, consistently and reliably. They form your lungs, which will breathe about 300 million times in your lifetime, also reliably, in a way to take in oxygen and to oxygen that travels down a cascade of chemical reactions and molecular pathways to generate the energy that will power your organs. It's a very big and daunting problem, and that only gives you a glimpse of the big data that is the universe of just you in particular. So now, the data challenges start at this genetic level, so the 20,000 genes or so that I just mentioned, and then there are variants within that for every one of you, variations across the population in this room, within populations and across populations in the world. And then when you take those genes and those variants and then you also start interacting with the environment, you start forming a very unique environment, which is an environment that consists of you, which is biology and chemistry and epigenetics and so on. Even though in this panel we're talking about the concept of big data, or you can think of it as medicine and big data, in a way you can think of medicine as it is a big data problem. And as medicine travels from an environment of population-based to patient-based, and it becomes personalized and tailored to the particular combination of things that are you, I think there's a lot of potential for it to start driving the way that we transform medicine into something that's very personalized and tailored to the diagnosis, treatment, and delivery of care to every single patient in the way that's very optimal for their particular health. So with that, I'll turn to our panelists. So I'll start with directly to my left, Kathy Hibbs, who's the Chief Legal and Regulatory Officer for 23andMe, formerly Senior Vice President and General Counsel for Genomic Health and Monogram Biosciences. Welcome. We have Satnam Alag, who's the VP of Software Engineering at Illumina, formerly CTO and VP of Engineering at NextBio, and the author of Collective Intelligence in Action. And then we have Eric Peters, who's Comparison Diagnostics Development Leader of Genetech, formerly managed Illumina's in vitro diagnostic products, and the author of Pharmacogenetics and Antidepressant Response. And myself, I'm Nick Encina. I'm the Vice President of the Innovation Lab for PerkinElmer. Previously, a series of startups from pharmaceutical companies and technology companies leading up to my last technology company, which was acquired by PerkinElmer. So I'll start off with a simple question. Since we began by making relation to big data, could you please, Kathy, tell us about how big data, what type of big data you're dealing with, what does it mean to you, and how does it factor in to the mission and driving personalized medicine forward?
So for 23andMe, if folks don't know, we're a direct-to-consumer genetic testing company. We've been around for almost 10 years, offering the product for about 7. We have tested over 950,000 people. Of those 950,000 people, when we test them for 700,000 genes on a SNP array. There's another 300,000 SNPs that are imputed. So obviously about 1 million genetic data points for each of them. Over 80% of our customers consent to participatory research in biobanking. That 80% of our customer base that is consented to research has answered over 300 million questions. So that's our big data.
Excellent. Satnam?
At Illumina, most of you must know about Illumina as a sequencing company that has brought the cost of the whole genome down from initially $3 billion about 10 years back to less than $1,000. I'm part of the enterprise informatics business unit where we really deal with 3 different types of data. So the first one is obviously molecular data that comes out from our sequencer. As Nicolas mentioned, a whole genome is about 3.2 billion base pairs of information. When the data gets sequenced, it's about 150 gigs of data compressed. That's the first kind of data, what we call as the molecular data. Then the other type of data that we really deal with is something called phenotypical data about the individual. And there's a number of trends happening within that particular area. The amount of data that's coming out is very much longitudinal in nature with the advent of devices like wearable devices. They're almost continuous. And the third kind of data is what I call as the reference data. So the huge amount of publications, clinical trials data, the reference genome. And what we do is really aggregate all of this information and provide an environment for discovery.
So I work at Genetech. Genetech is a biopharmaceutical company, so we use and generate a fair amount of big data. This includes things like drug discovery, so we generate our own sequencing data. We also have a partnership with 23andMe around certain indications where we're going to try to find new drug targets. Going on in kind of the drug development path, we use big data sources, including patient-level data, to both kind of enroll into specific clinical trials. So Genetech has a history of personalized healthcare with several marketed drugs that are targeted at certain biomarkers. So we are continuing that and using our clinical trials to really select out patients that we think will have the best benefit based on their data. And then post kind of marketing, Genetech has a strong interest in making sure that those patients on market actually have access to those therapeutics. And so we recently signed an agreement with Foundation Medicine in Cambridge, and that company really uses next generation sequencing to analyze the patient's tumor to make sure that they are getting the most effective treatment that is available at this time.
Excellent, thank you. So I'll ask a general question and then quantify it for every one of your different fields, but feel free to comment on each other's questions and answers as well. So what are the non-apparent challenges or opportunities in applying big data to medicine? So if we think about that from, say, a technical perspective, Satnam, I know you deal with a lot of big data and machine learning and so on. What would you say are some of the challenges and like some of the hidden opportunities in dealing with that?
So I want to bring together two different trends that are happening. The first one is just from a technology standpoint, what has happened in the last 5 to 10 years with the advent of big data technologies like Hadoop and Spark and the ability to do MapReduce algorithms. It's now possible to mine large amounts of data in a very cost-effective manner. That has also led to other innovations like on the technology side with Lucene and Elasticsearch that can transform the data. And lastly is the ability to do deep learning algorithms, machine learning algorithms, where you're no longer constrained by getting all of the data into memory. You can actually distribute it out. So that's one trend. The other trend that has happened is the advent of large amounts of data. And it was just about 3 years back that we were all very excited by the 1,000 Genome Project. Many of you may have heard last year the Genomics England project, where it's a cohort of about 100,000 patients that are being sequenced. And just a few months back, the vision is to have 1 million cohort patients as a part of the President's Precision Medicine Initiative. The emergence of technology at this time, the advent of more and more projects coming in with a lot more velocity, creating cohorts of rich amounts of phenotypical and molecular data provide an opportunity for, as what Eric mentioned, discovery. The challenges are, number one, phenotypical data, there's lack of standardization, obviously, so we're working very hard to build a standard. The next thing that's happening is the data is going to be geographically isolated. That is, in the future, as these large-scale sequencing projects happen, there are going to be pockets. So obviously, if you want science to improve, you want discovery to happen, what you need is advents of APIs and standardizations that I can run an algorithm on each of the different data sets, combine the information together. It's more of a federation model. And then the other interesting thing that's going to happen is because the size of the data is so large that really the algorithms have to move to the data. So platform as a service, ability for people to write their own algorithms. I think those are the various opportunities that I see on the technology side.
Excellent, thank you. And same question for you, Kathy. Apparent challenges, non-apparent challenges, and opportunities there from more of a legal, regulatory, or even social aspect.
Yeah, I think, one of the issues that has been partially addressed in the U.S. is genetic privacy. It's very important to getting people to be willing to take a test, whether it's a direct-to-consumer test or even a test prescribed by their doctor. In the U.S., we have GINA. That protects people against employment discrimination and discrimination as it relates to health care insurance, but it doesn't cover life insurance. Some people, will maybe get their life insurance policies before they take a genetic test, even if it is one that's being ordered by a physician. And it is not universally the case. Most countries around the world have not yet addressed this. And so I think that is something that is critically important in order to enable the technology to be adopted. I think one of the maybe hidden opportunities that we know, certainly from the experience at 23andMe, but I also know from my experience at Monogram, is that this information can motivate patient and healthy people's behavior. So for Monogram, we were obviously providing people with a very sophisticated analysis of drug response for combination therapy. And what we came to find out when we tried to sort of take away the pretty colored reports from physicians was they said, no, we need those. We show them to our patients. And seeing the actual suppression of their virus in the presence of the drug is what helps them sustain on that therapy, because these are complicated regimens. Some drugs have to be taken before food, some after food. They have side effects, as people are quite aware of. Some of those drugs have really serious side effects. And physicians were able to use that information to encourage adherence to therapy. And certainly for 23andMe, we see people, the number one thing people report they do after they get their 23andMe, talk to their families and think about their lifestyle changes. Those are the things that people do with it. So I think there's a huge potential for motivating patient behavior in terms of adherence to clinical therapies, and also for motivating preventative care, because it is a mechanism to get people to engage in their own health and well-being.
Excellent, thank you. And Eric, scientifically, so in the bench, dealing with this data, what are those non-apparent opportunities and challenges there?
It's a great question. So it's something we struggle with at Genetech on several levels, and I'll just kind of give an example that we've been dealing with recently. So if you imagine a metastatic lung cancer patient, late line, so they've been through many therapies. If that patient is, for instance, in an area that doesn't have access to, pretty advanced technology, so say Omaha, Nebraska or something, that patient might not know, and the doctor might not know, that they have actionable biomarkers in their tumor. So proven actionable biomarkers, EGFR mutations, Tarceva is indicated and will extend life. So access to that data and educating the healthcare system on how to interpret that data is a real challenge that we face as we put more and more targeted medicines in front of patients and in front of doctors. So simplifying kind of the results of big data is one challenge that we face, and really we want to make sure that patients are getting the best care. So that's a pretty thorny problem to solve. So we're looking at ways to really educate, oncologists that might not be at leading academic medical centers, which is honestly not where the majority of patients are treated in the US. The flip side to that is a metastatic lung cancer patient that might be at an academic medical center and got complete whole genome sequencing. The physician might do that, and as is legal in the United States, might look for variants that they think are important and indicate a different drug. There's a potential that we are perhaps using big data in too much of a Pollyanna way. So the thing that Genetech is concerned about, or really what we really concern about in treatment of these patients, is that we're not over-interpreting the data. Because the first and foremost thing is drug development is about safety. Efficacy is actually after you prove that the drug is safe. So we want to make sure that these things are done in a safe way. And that's actually really hard when you have big data, because every patient becomes an N of 1. And when you have an N of 1, it's hard to show what that patient should be doing. So what we need is big data to help kind of generate that data set that we can then interpret and use for individual patients. But on the flip side, how do we do that in a safe manner? Because we don't want to put patients on therapies that might be unsafe, or worse, and what tends to happen more often, forego therapies that do have known benefits, because that's just as big of a risk as we see. So
if I can add on to that, the paradox of precision medicine is that to provide individualized treatment for a particular patient, you actually need a cohort of millions of patients. Because if you take it two main areas, I think Eric mentioned oncology as well as rare undiagnosed genomic diseases, one of the first things that you want to do is to see if there's somebody else who had a very similar condition and what the outcomes were. So, having access to these large data sets is going to be key for precision medicine.
True. So other industries have integrated big data to drive insights successfully for some time, in finance, Facebook, Google, cosmology, and so on. How would you say, and this is open to the panel, how do you say that health is on track to leveraging big data the way that other industries are? What would you say in that path are we?
Do you want to go first?
Sure.
I get very excited by this particular field, and what I envision is in the future, it's going to be an event-driven system. Number one, imagine that there's a large cohort of big data, with phenotypical and molecular data. Today, discoveries that are made, in terms of to improve science are a lot of it is a bioinformatics person going in and trying to see the correlation between the different kinds of information that's there. So I want you to expand that out a little bit. Imagine that all of those models have been built into a representation into the system. Now, at least the way I see it is, a few years from now, I want it to be more of an event-driven system. So when there's a new event coming in or a new patient information coming in, obviously one of the first questions that you ask is how is this similar to the other cohorts that are there, and provide an information that is specific to this particular patient. The other one is as this new data comes in, automatically all of the predictive models or hypotheses that have been placed into the system would look for, if there's a match, if there's an increase in the appropriate p-value or the power of the information, and that's how discoveries will make. I think at very large volumes, I would even say that perhaps scientific discoveries will happen before we understand the biological significance of it, and then go back and try and understand, why it makes biological sense.
Well, and I think that it's more difficult than in finance or in a commercial marketplace, because changing healthcare is hard. You have a billing system, a payment and billing system that's very archaic and is built on actions that are taken by physicians, and most of our health records are built on whether or not our physician can get paid. So that's what our EHRs track for, is really a mechanism to facilitate payment under the billing system. So that data necessarily needs to be changed to really make it proactive for health. And then I think the other thing is changing physician and practice behavior also takes time and takes education, and so it will be more complicated to make the change. One of the things that I think is most promising, though, is that individuals are engaged in this in a way that they haven't been before, and that is in part because they are now exposed to the kind of information they can get on Google. Who would go to a travel agent to find out what flights they could take on vacation? So people now see the power of that, and they want that same power and that same decision-making and choice in healthcare as well. So I think that will spur things a lot faster than historically has happened.
That's a good point. So it's come up subtly in a few different answers here, but so a lot of what we do in science, especially in the genetic level, is probabilistic versus deterministic, right? When you consider the complexity of genomics and the subtleties with individuals. So given that that's the environment that we live in, how do we decide whether our knowledge around the interpretation of science is still evolving, or is it settled science, something that we can actually put in front of patients or physicians? I know 23andMe's, dealt with that, getting information in front of patients as well. How do we know when it's time to migrate that information downstream?
I think that encapsulates, at least from my perspective and what I do, the main problem is translational research, translational oncology specifically, is becoming more and more blurred between what's research and what's clinical practice. And if you look at kind of the treatment guidelines, even from the NCCN guidelines, which are pretty much considered standard treatment guidelines in oncology, those are getting thicker and thicker because very one could say small research discoveries are being put into the guidelines pretty quickly. So I think that's a very good opportunity, but I think it's also a challenge, right? Because keeping up the educational system, keeping up the treatment paradigms in a rapidly changing environment is difficult in healthcare. Healthcare data is just treated differently, right? So I think there's a challenge in accessing the data and actually getting it in front of doctors in an effective way. It has huge potential, but I think compared to other kinds of big data, it's got its own challenges.
True. And given that this is an entrepreneurship panel, I'm assuming there are a lot of entrepreneurs here in the audience, and so to put something in context there, so the federal government is the single biggest controller of medical data, and they're making more and more of that data available through efforts like data.gov and healthdata.gov and so on. So anybody in the panel, what advice do you have for people in the audience, or just people generally, to get more involved entrepreneurially, or starting companies, or creating algorithms or products or technology around that kind of data in a way that they can get involved in pushing personalized medicine forward? One
of the things that we have is a platform called BaseSpace, and it allows us, anyone to come in and build a simple application. It's a Docker-based application. It's really simple to build. Perhaps one of the easiest ways to get access to the genomics data is to build a simple application and make it available to literally thousands of people at the same time. That was one.
Mm-hmm. I think the other thing is that, for a lot of us that live in the Bay Area, San Diego, or Boston, we are surrounded by academic medical centers. And so we have access to a lot of this information and the expertise in the academic medical centers and also just in the community. And one of the challenges and one of the opportunities is getting technology out to areas where people actually are. I think the statistic is something on the order of some 25% of the U.S. population lives 85 miles or more from a treating physician. So there are huge opportunities in thinking about how to make this actually accessible beyond sort of the metropolitan areas, and that obviously has huge international appeal as well.
Great, thank you. I think for the interest of time, we have about 3.5 minutes. So we'll ask one more question. If you could give me a brief answer to each one of those. It'll be a general one with specific parts of it as well, and then hopefully we can have some time for questions. Let's say that we're 10 years down the road, and we're in an era of personalized medicine. In your opinion, how has life changed? How's the world better for patients, lifestyles, medical practice, drug discovery, the way that people interact with their own personal health care, their own genomics and stuff like that? How do you say that the world has changed in 10 years? Let's say drug discovery, Eric.
I think, in 10 years, I don't think we can actually imagine what it'll be. But at least in my head, for drug discovery, drug delivery, and kind of clinical practice, the concept of selling a drug or selling a treatment or selling a device will go away, and you'll pay for outcomes, right? So essentially, healthcare payers will require seeing a certain amount of outcomes, or there's no payment involved. So,
I think 10 years from now, healthcare is going to be a data-driven problem. It's going to be a lot more patient-centric view, where you put the patient at the center and make sure that predictive analytics, in terms of making sure that the outcomes are the best outcomes. So flipping it from what is currently a more of a evidence-based, into more of a patient-centric view and also a big data problem.
And I think we'll add preventative care that will actually, to get to better outcomes, you do have to catch disease before it occurs. So I think we'll move down the path of preventative care.
Great, thank you. And so with that, I think we can open it up to some questions. I think we have about 1.5 minutes if people have questions. Yes, sir.